Welcome everyone, good morning, evening and afternoon. Today is Sunday, and on this blessed Sunday we are talking about several changes to some of the specs in this game for the beta of Dragonflight. These are much bigger changes than what we have covered in the last few days. If you have watched my videos, and you should have, by the way, you will have seen some balance tuning which refers to like, oh, this spec got a 5% less damage to this particular ability, oh, this other spec got 3% more healing to the effect of this ability. None of that here. These changes are much bigger, much larger. These changes are for Havoc, Demon Hunter, Balance Druid, Ret Paladin and the 3 rogue specs. These numbers are much larger, they cover much more of the spec in total. Now, take in mind that the majority of these changes are still in beta, and I can guarantee you that the majority of these were warranted because of the state that these specs were in the beta. When it came to damage, the damage of Balance Druid was definitely over the top in the beta, the damage of Havoc Demon Hunter in AoE and the damage of Ret Paladin in AoE, they were also way over the top and needed to be tuned down. So many of these changes will reflect on these issues for these specs. First in line is Havoc. Now, Havoc gets a change to the entirety of the kit. It's not a fine tuning, it's not a particular part of the kit, it's not a particular type of damage or a particular type of build, it's like everything. Metamorphosis duration is now 1 second shorter, the improved Chaos Strike damage increase goes from 15 to 10%, initiative bonus critical strike chance goes from 15 to 12, momentum damage increase goes from 10 to 8, Furious Gaze, the haste buff after I-beam, goes from 12 seconds long to 10 seconds long, burning wound damage. The damage has been reduced by 20%, so pretty much the entirety of the kit, whether it's Burning Wound, Immolation Aura, Chaos Strike, Fell Rush damage, or stat increases, gets nerfed. There wasn't really anything in particular that caused Havoc to get nerfed. It was more like the entirety of the tree as a whole. Also, something that affects Vengeance Demon Hunter as well is that Soul Rending, the Metamorphosis Leech bonus, has been reduced from 10 to 20% to 5 to 10%. So now it's half as strong, the leech you get from Soul Rending. That is definitely quite impactful for Vengeance Demon Hunter as well. Now, while Havoc gets nerfed overall without a real goal in the kit to nerf, the goal for the nerfs to Balance Druid are very clear, because the nerfs to Balance Druid are both in damage, but more importantly in the generation of astral power. The issue with the beta of this reworked talent tree of Balance Druid is that, scientifically speaking, they were generating astral power out their ass. It got to a point where you were basically almost pressing Star Surge, your spender, more than you were casting Wrath or Starfire, your generators. It got to the point where an effect like Primordial Arcanic Pulsar, which puts you into Celestial Alignment every 300 astral power spent, which is supposed to happen roughly every minute, you know, is supposed to have a roughly 60-second cooldown, was happening every 20 seconds. That's how fast you were generating astral power. So, the result is that while your abilities also got hit, both Star Surge and Starfall, your spender, got their damage nerfed by 35%. What also gets hit is your astral power generation across the board. Astral Communion now generates 60 astral power instead of 75. Arcanic Pulsar no longer procs every 300 astral power spent, but every 600. Elune's Guidance is now going to reduce the astral power cost of Star Surge only by 5 instead of 10, and the astral power cost of Starfall by 8 instead of 15. Rattle the Stars is going to reduce the cost of Starfall and Star Surge by 5% per stack instead of 10% per stack, and now the default cost of Star Surge goes from 30 to 40 as well. And Shooting Stars also generates 2 astral power instead of 3, plus, just for free, it got nerfed by 50% in damage. You know, it's pretty funny because this made your Star Surge go from costing 16 astral power with all of the buffs possible to discount. It costed 16 astral power, and now it's gonna cost 32, 31 point something. So basically twice as much. Basically now, even with all of the discounts, your Star Surge will cost twice as much as it did before this set of nerfs. These type of nerfs are always the more tricky, are always the more dangerous, because if you, let's just say one spec, if you like Fire Mage, okay, you are a fan of Fire Mage, the King of Warcraft, nerf Fire Mage by 20%. You still like Fire Mage, the spec plays exactly the same, you do your rotation exactly the same, you just do less damage, nothing else has changed. But when you take a spec and you change the way they generate resources, the way they gain their resources, their combo points, fury, rage, energy to use in their rotation, that can impact them, that can affect the way they play much, much more. So this is what could be much more tricky for balanced druids in changing their rotation and in changing the way they play, because of how much the astral power generation has been touched by these nerfs for balance. Of course, it's still the beta, of course there is more time, plenty of time to change and to revisit these modifications, also known as nerfs, to balance, but for now it was deserved in terms of damage. The damage was too high for balanced druid, but now that the astral power generated gets touched, perhaps it's gonna make it a little bit too clunky to play for balance. The situation is not nearly the same for Ret Paladin. None of the generation gets touched, none of the holy power generation is affected for Ret. What is changed is the damage. They have gotten a few tiny things in the general tree, so that's also a nerf to Holy Paladin and a nerf to Prot Paladin, because Seal of the Crusader now increases holy damage taken by the target by 3 or 6% instead of 5 and 10%. Divine Purpose, your free proc of a spender, now increases the damage of your next holy spender by 15% instead of 20%. So all of these are tiny little tuning changes, nerfs, but in the general tree for all three specs. The particular set of nerfs to Holy Paladin, the particular set of nerfs for Ret are around their spenders, because both Divine Storm and Templar's Verdict, or the upgraded version of Templar's Verdict, Final Verdict, they all got nerfed by 35% damage. There are a few other nerfs on top of that, like Execution Sentence now is going to deal 10% of the damage done to the target instead of 20% of the damage done. Changes to Templar's Vindication, your current conduit in Shadowlands, gets nerfed as well. But of course the main course of the nerfs is the 35% damage to your two finishers. It was a little bit weird because, you know, the problem seen in the beta was the overbearing amount of AoE damage that Ret Paladin was doing. It didn't feel as much of a problem when it came to single target damage. That's why it was surprising to see Templar's Verdict also getting nerfed by 35%. But these nerfs are much less of a problem than the ones to Balanced Druid, because these are just nerfs to numbers primarily. You can fix these very, very quickly. You're not getting changed in the amount of holy power you are generating or in the cooldowns of your abilities. These are just flat number changes which are much, much simpler to correct later on in the iteration of the beta for Dragonflight. Talking about changes and talking about the iteration of the beta, we do have, technically speaking, the largest changes happening to rogues. This is because part of the rogue changes are to the aura modifiers. Every spec in the game has an aura modifier that Blizzard can touch to change the entirety of the spec's damage or healing. So in the case of rogue, all three got gutted. Subtlety has gotten all of its abilities damage reduced by 17%, Outlaw by 14.5%, and Assassination by 34%. I think Assassination's aura modifier was the highest. I think it was at plus 51% in Shadowlands, so it's bound to get cut off a little bit more, so that it allows Blizzard to balance the spec by ability and talent by talent, if you remove this very large modifier they have in front of them. The general tree of Rogue gets some nerfs by itself. So these are nerfs that are going to touch all three of the specs. Alacrity now grants less haste than before, Thistlety now grants less mastery than before, and Find Weakness grants less armor ignore than before. The main change is between Outlaw and Assassination, because while Assassination gets nerfed a lot in their overall damage, they get compensation buffs to the rest of their abilities, most of their abilities and talents, like Rapture now deals 22% more damage. Deathmark, your replacement of Vendetta, now deals 227% more damage. Poison Bomb damage is increased by 200%, Sepsis damage is increased by 60%, Kingsbane damage is increased by 50%, many damage increases to many of the talents of Assassination. The main change with Outlaw is that what they get is not compensation, what they get is just more nerfs. Opportunity strike chance has been reduced from 35 to 30, the Weapon Master bonus strike chance has been reduced from 10% to 5%, Swift Slasher bonus attack speed per combo point goes from 3 to 2%, Quick Draw and Greenskin's Wickers, the bonus pistol shot damage mechanics, one goes from 50% to 20%, the other goes from 300% to 200%. So, while Assassination, at the very least, gets something back for having all of their damage lowered, Outlaw just gets even more nerfs. What Outlaw and Assassination have in common, however, unfortunately, is the same style of nerfs of Balanced Druid, which is nerfs to their resources. Because Assassination's Venomous Wounds energy regen goes from 7 to 5, and Assassination's Venom Rush energy regen goes from 8 to 5. Similarly, for Outlaw, Combat Potency energy regen has been reduced from 30 to 20%. Fatal Flourish chance to restore energy goes from 75 to 60%. So both of these specs do get hit in the amount of energy they have at their disposal. It's not nearly as bad for Outlaw as it is for Assassination. These hurt Assassination more than Outlaw when it comes to having more energy at their disposal, and still, both of these are not as bad as the Astral Power nerfs that Balanced Druid got. Those are much worse than Rogue. So overall, these are the changes for today on this Sunday. I agree in the general idea that these specs were overtuned in terms of numbers in the beta. For what it's worth, which is very little, because that's not really what matters in the beta. These specs were clearly doing more damage than they were supposed to. Of course, then you have the question, the issue, or the possible problem that some nerfs are okay, like the nerfs to Havoc Demon Hunter being some tiny, small numbers being nerfed across the board. Others are perhaps a bit confusing in what they are targeting. At the very least, they are trying to specifically hit a strength of a certain spec, like Ret Paladin and their AoE damage. Others are a little bit more confusing because, as we said before, they are more risky. Changing the way you generate your resources, changing the way you approach your rotation by changing your resources can be much more tricky to balance and can cause way more issues, way more problems in the future than just changing numbers, for example. That is the potential issue we might see in the future. We will see just how badly these specs have gotten hurt in how they play. As I said, Outlaw is the least affected by these resource changes. Assassination is quite annoying overall, but they should be kind of used. Assassination rogue players to be in the slowest spec, the least active spec in terms of actions and buttons per minute. They are quite a slow rolling spec, so it doesn't change too much. And then of course you have Balanced Druid, which is vastly the more affected by these astral power changes, and we will see just how badly it will impact them in these future builds of the beta. For now, we can stop here. We will check out tomorrow or in a couple of days all of the list of changes to the tier sets, because of course on top of this set of balance tuning, Blizzard also went ahead and touched, nerfed, buffed, and in some cases completely reworked many of the tier set bonuses available in Dragonflight. So we will go and check those out as well, even though, as Blizzard themselves pointed out, they are not going to be nearly as OP as the tier set bonuses we have now in Shadowlands, but it's still going to be an interesting thing to go and check what Blizzard has planned for the tier pieces. For now, we are stopping here. We are taking a break on this Sunday. Thanks, of course, as usual. We are starting with our dear Patreon supporters. They are one of the main helps we get in allowing me to continue to produce content for WoW and to delve deep into the changes of the beta of Dragonflight as we keep going closer and closer to the release of the expansion. Further forward, forward, you can bring more support to yours truly, this time completely for free, by liking and commenting down below. That should cost you only one click and a couple of keystrokes, I guess, and then also, of course, to subscribe to the channel itself. Lastly, for more social interactions and general parasocial relationships, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right down at these two links. Now, with this being said, and with this barking dog in the background, we can now take a leave. Thank you guys for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, I don't know, man, my nose has started hitching like 10 minutes ago, and it's gotten increasingly harder to finish this fucking video. God damn.